Boss fights are one of the most exhilarating moments in games, and some of these encounters are memorable long after you beat the game. Maybe it is because of the size of the boss, maybe it is because of how hard it was to beat, or maybe it's about how epic the soundtrack during that boss fight was. So that is why in today's video I'm going to talk to you about how to design a boss. I'm also going to provide you with a design sheet that you can use in your own boss designs. The link is in the description box below. When you first see a boss battle, it just seems to be a bigger enemy with a big health and big damage capabilities. Maybe it's accompanied by a scary and epic soundtrack. Yet, is that really all a boss is? In my opinion, the boss and the battle that usually comes with them is much more than that. There are a lot of aspects that have to be thought out and be carefully designed in order to have a good solid boss. Join me in discovering what these are. The first aspect you need to define before you design your boss is your character's abilities and mechanics. This is because bosses are the ultimate test for the player to master those mechanics. Once you have those skills of the player defined, you can start to think about what your boss might be able to do. You can do this in two different ways. One way to do this is with the currently learned moves from the character. This approach is normally used in titles like Super Mario. In these games, Mario doesn't acquire any new ability throughout the game, so he needs to take down the bosses with the current available skill set. Another way is to design the encounter with a new ability in mind. This approach is used to teach the player how to do something or how to use a new item. We can see this encounter normally in earlier games of the Legend of Zelda series of games, in which Link had to defeat a certain boss in a dungeon using the item that he found in that dungeon. This served as the ultimate test of using that item. The second aspect is the basic principle for boss design. Form follows function. If you know what you want the boss to do, then that will determine its appearance. If he can shoot, make sure they have a gun. If he can dodge attacks, give them a shield. Another important thing to mention here is that if you want to highlight a weak point in your boss, make sure to make it evident. For example, if your enemy's weak point is its eye, make sure that it's big and bright so that the player knows that it is where they need to be attacking. Also, make sure that your boss design makes sense with its abilities. For example, for a big huge boss, it probably doesn't make sense to make them very fast, unless it can be explained somehow in the game. Whatever decision you make, just make sure that your player understands the behavior of your boss. The third aspect is to think about what the boss represents in your story and for your character. This can affect your encounter dramatically, as it can change how your encounter is designed. If your encounter is more physical, it will look more like fighting a troll in God of War. However, if it is more of a mental or intellectual fight, then your encounter will look similar to the Colossi in Shadow of the Colossus. There may also be a global threat, in which the encounter is not a person, but a threat to the world in which the character lives. In this case, the encounter is against a threat instead of a person. The fourth aspect of boss design are the characteristics of boss fight. They should be a worthy adversary to the player, otherwise they serve no purpose as a boss. They should represent something to the hero, maybe an obstacle to rescue the princess or maybe even vengeance. The player needs to gain something by defeating them. Maybe it is experience, a new item that the player can use, or a power-up. The point is, it needs to be something cool that makes it worth it. Remember, bosses are typically guardians of some sort of item or progression blocker that prevents the player from advancing further into the game. The objective is for players to get better and conquer them in order to progress and eventually beat the game. Once you have your boss's design, its attacks, and abilities, you know what it represents in the story, and you understand some of their characteristics, then you can start designing the fifth aspect, its attack patterns. If you take a look at how other games do bosses, regardless of how mean or hard they might be, they always give the player a chance to fight back and counterattack. It is all about the player learning the boss moveset, with the goal of trying to remember and understand its patterns in order to beat it in the end. In order to keep the battle interesting, you need to make sure that the patterns don't become too predictable. The boss changes its approach as the fight goes on. It gets more difficult and the windows of opportunity for the player to attack narrower. Last but not least, I think it is also important to take into consideration the sixth aspect, where the boss battle takes place. I think we can all agree that a lot of the greatest boss battles of all time take place in awesome battle arenas. It does make a big difference, as it not only adds to the atmosphere of the moment, but in some cases it can also add to how the player can use a space to their advantage in a boss fight. For example, in Bloodborne, when you're facing the shadow of Yarnam, you can use the tombstone in the middle to hide from the fireballs that one of the shadows throws at you, while you're trying to deal with the other two. So when you're designing your boss, try to also think about how your boss level is going to work with those specific boss mechanics and how the player is going to use that level and if they're going to be at an advantage or at a disadvantage. As with all things game design related, boss design is not a one-size-fits-all. Certainly, boss design has changed a lot, especially with games like Dark Souls and Bloodborne. Previously, a lot of people thought that bosses needed to be huge to be considered bosses, and that has changed recently. With all that being said, feel free to experiment in all your designs and make sure you playtest your bosses. If you see something you like that doesn't abide by the rules that I say here, don't worry about it. Game design evolves very quickly, and I am sure that there are things that will change over time or with one industry-changing game. Who knows? Maybe it will be your game that breaks the rules and shows us something new and amazing. Finally, I wanted to remind you of the free boss design sheet I have linked in the description box below. Essentially, this document is meant to document your boss designs and make sure that your bosses have everything they need to be awesome in your game. This template includes everything your boss design will require, ranging from your boss attacks and patterns to arena and even sound effects. Don't forget to download a copy before you go. And that's it, you guys. Thank you so much for watching. What are your favorite boss fights and why? Please let me know in the comment section below. Also, if you like this video, please hit the like button and share it with your friends. See you next time!